You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, it is a great pleasure to address you today as Foreign Minister of our government on the matter of Iceland's application for membership of the European Union. Iceland is a country we've all got to know considerably better because of Eyjafjallajökull, the volcano which has been disturbing us in recent months, and my apologies to the interpreters for mentioning the name. You will know, having adopted a resolution on enlargement strategy for the European Union and for the continent as a whole, that this has been a successful strategy both for the longer standing and the newer members. You will agree that the enlargement process makes a valuable contribution towards peace and democracy and stability on the continent. It enhances the weight of the European Union on the global stage, and it brings great advantages and considerable better welfare and economic prospects to all our citizens. It also enhances opportunities in the area of energy and transport for our citizens. So we need to build on the achievements of the previous presidency, and we need to breathe new life into the consensus that enlargement is the way forward. This was agreed in the Council of 2006, and it is indeed part of the trio presidency programme for this presidency. Therefore, we will continue to work on that. We feel that it is important that we make enlargement one of the main priority planks of our presidency programme. On the 17th of June, we had a recommendation from the Commission on the whole question of accession of Iceland. We received this in a positive light, and we feel that there is now consensus that we should move towards enlargement. In 1993, the Council in Copenhagen set down a number of criteria, political criteria, which Iceland now complies with. The Council has also agreed now that accession negotiations should be open. The Council has also requested a framework to be set down for these negotiations and has reminded us of the ultimate goal, which is to ensure that Iceland adopts the acquis communautaire in its entirety and fully implements and complies with this acquis. This means that Iceland has got to comply with existing requirements and undertakings, and has also got to implement all the agreements in the EEA and also certain requirements of the supervisory authority of the EEA. Iceland has also got to address another series of weak points which the Commission has highlighted. It's flagged up in matters such as financial services. The European Council also welcomes the fact that Iceland is keen to address these issues and is convinced that it will be able to pursue its efforts very actively to resolve all these outstanding issues. The European Council has also confirmed that, as in the case of all other applicants, negotiations will be based on looking at the merits of the case, and the speed at which negotiations advance will depend on the commitment and involvement in the course of the negotiations. How do we intend to work on this? We intend to apply the self-same procedure we followed in the context of previous accession procedures. We will aim to renew the consensus on the whole principle of enlargement. We will adopt a negotiating framework for Iceland, and we will establish a number of general principles which will guide the negotiations and set down the conditions to be fulfilled. The negotiating framework will also reflect the particular and distinct situation and geographical location of Iceland. This country has been able to benefit from assistance under the IPA programme, and this will certainly contribute towards making the accession negotiations go more smoothly. In the meantime, the Commission has also sent the negotiating framework to the Council, and I hope that the General Affairs Council, which I will chair on the 26th of July, will be in a position to adopt these recommendations, and we will therefore be able to set up the first intergovernmental conference with Iceland before the end of the month. This calendar would enable us to embark on accession negotiations before the summer recess. There then will be an analytical process, we need to have a screening process looking at how far Iceland already complies with the acquis and what specific areas of negotiation should be negotiated first. These areas are subdivided into a number of chapters with which you'll be familiar, I'm sure. The Commission will present its first regular report this autumn on the progress which has been achieved by Iceland towards accession. Once the screening procedure is carried out, a proposal will be put forward, and the Council will then identify the criteria for opening and completing each separate chapter. There are those who have asked how long negotiations for accession will take with Iceland. This is an open question. It's already a member of the Schengen Zone and the EEA, and as such, Iceland is already closely linked with the European Union and integrated in many important areas where the acquis holds sway. It is not possible for us to fix a definitive calendar for the negotiations, nor to prejudge the outcome of detailed negotiations in areas such as fishing or whaling, where Europe has a very clear-cut position, which is an integral part of the acquis which Iceland will have to adopt. There's also the question of agriculture and rural development, and it is likely that negotiations may go a little less rapidly there. So we have to deal with issues as they arise on their merits, rather than an artificially structured and imposed calendar. The Belgian presidency is committed to making as much progress as it can, as rapidly as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, honourable members, you know that the accession procedure for the European Union is very important. It's important for the European Union, and it's been a success for the continent of Europe hitherto. The Belgian presidency is delighted to have the privilege of chairing the community over the next 6 months and working with you for the next 6 months, particularly closely, not only on the question of accession of Iceland, but other applicant and candidate countries too. I should like to underline what our Prime Minister has just said in his presentation of the Belgian presidency programme, and it is this: the Belgian presidency is well aware, very well aware, of the crucial role to be played by the European Parliament, not least in the wake of the Lisbon Treaty. In areas such as supporting the enlargement process, you have a particularly vital and valuable role to play. And it is also important that the citizens of the European Union endorse and support this process, and it is important you have a vital role to play there too. I'd like to thank you for the constructive contribution you've made already to the enlargement procedure. I'd like to thank you for the contribution you've made in the shape of this specific resolution. You've also helped to ensure that public opinion is behind us in our endeavours, and I'd like to thank you for your attention as I conclude. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Ratspräsident. Das Wort.
Thank you very much indeed. I now give the floor on behalf of the Commission to Commissioner Füle.
Thank you very much, Madam President, honourable members of the European Parliament. It is my pleasure to be here with you today for an exchange of the views on Iceland and the next steps in the accession process. The unanimous decision of heads of states and governments to open accession negotiations taken at the June European Council is an important step forward in the country's bid to join the European Union. It clearly confirms that Iceland has a place in the European Union and the common will of Member States to welcome it as soon as all conditions are met. The Commission, of course, warmly welcomes this decision, which follows the recommendations of our opinion of February. Let me seize this opportunity to thank your Assembly for its support in its process and congratulate the rapporteur, the Honourable Member Preda, for his timely and high-quality report. The European Parliament resolution under discussion today is a very helpful contribution to the process. It delivers the right messages to Iceland at the right moment. I can assure your Assembly of the Commission's full support for this resolution. With the political backing of Member States, the Commission is now actively preparing the next stages of the accession process. As a first step, the Commission prepared a draft negotiating framework, as my predecessor rightly admitted, currently under discussion in the Council. The Belgian Presidency foresees adoption by the General Affairs Council on 26 July, with a view to convening the first intergovernmental conference with Iceland on 27 July. We count on the Member States' support in this endeavour. The negotiating framework lays down the general guidelines for the conduct of accession negotiations and points out reforms Iceland must undertake in order to join the European Union. As with all candidates, negotiations will be based on the country's own merit, and their pace will depend on Iceland's progress in meeting the requirements set out in the negotiating framework. This includes the fulfilment of Iceland's obligations under the European Economic Area. The Commission will provide Iceland with all necessary technical support to facilitate the process of negotiations. Furthermore, we are actively preparing for the assessment of Iceland's compliance with the acquis on a chapter-by-chapter basis through a so-called screening exercise. The screening is expected to start in autumn 2010 and should last until mid-next year. In line with the renewed consensus on enlargement, screening of chapters with special sensitivity in the Icelandic context, meaning financial services, fisheries, agriculture and environment, should start very early in the process. Throughout the whole process, the Commission aims to support Iceland's efforts to meet the accession criteria through financial assistance under the Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance, so-called IPA. We therefore welcome the entry into force next week of the amended IPA regulation, which allows Iceland to benefit from European Union assistance. I would like to thank Parliament for its constant support in the adoption process of this important regulation. And, as a sign of it now belonging fully to the enlargement family, Iceland will, for the first time, be included in our annual enlargement package this year, with the first progress report to be published mid-November, whereby progress over the last year will be monitored. Honourable Members of the European Parliament, as you can see, all preparations are well on track to allow for an early start of the negotiations. Iceland's membership of the EEA, its association with the Schengen Agreement and the country's high democratic standards will be valuable assets in this process. But we cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that the accession road will also hold a number of the challenges. We are well aware that the issues like whaling or fisheries, to quote the most obvious, are sensitive issues for both Iceland and the Member States. I heard your call for a constructive attitude when negotiating the fisheries chapters and can assure you that the Commission will conduct talks in the best spirit. As regards the Icesave issues, I understand the concern raised due to the slowdown in bilateral talks following the negative outcome of the referendum in Iceland in March. As referred to in your resolution, we hope that clarification of the legal situation provided by a letter of formal notice from the EFTA Surveillance Authority will facilitate the process of swiftly finding a satisfactory agreement between Iceland, the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. Recent exchanges at ministerial level give reasons for hope. Let me stress that I greatly appreciate the efforts and commitment of all parties involved to try and find an agreement on this issue. The Commission will of course closely follow the developments in the framework of the accession process. Not least, I share your concerns on the challenges stemming from the absence of national consensus and the relating low level of public support in Iceland for membership. I duly noted the call made on the Commission to provide support to the Icelandic authorities in its communication strategy on European Union membership. Communication will be a clear priority for IPA support to Iceland. We are working on the setting up of an information centre in the country and the development of factual and objective communication material. Our delegation in Reykjavik, which will be fully operational by autumn, will be instrumental in addressing the citizens of Iceland. It will work in very close cooperation with the Icelandic government, which bears the first responsibility in this regard. To conclude, let me reiterate the Commission's full support of Iceland's aspiration to join the European Union. I am confident that Iceland will continue to undertake all necessary efforts to ensure a positive outcome of the accession negotiations. As I have emphasised on previous occasions, I will make sure that Parliament is kept fully informed throughout the negotiating process. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Es folgen
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, speakers on behalf of the political groups. First of all, Mr. Preda on behalf of the EPP group. For 2 minutes.
Mulțumesc mult, doamna președintă.
Thank you very much, President. I would like, first of all, to welcome the representatives of the Commission and the Council and to express my thanks for the good partnership that we have had with these two institutions as well as with colleagues from other political groups. The report I drew approaches Iceland's request to join the Union through four main perspectives. First of all, political criteria. No problem here. Iceland has a strong democratic tradition. On the other hand, despite encouraging signs, there are still doubts concerning the independence of the judiciary system. Moreover, the Icelandic authorities must cease to make a distinction concerning and a discrimination concerning the European citizens' right to take part in local elections and to vote. Secondly, economic criteria. As member of the European Economic Area, Iceland already fulfills many obligations of EU member states. I am heartened by the resuming of negotiations concerning the IceSafe case as well as the recent signs of economic consolidation. I support Iceland's urge to join the European Euro as soon as possible and of course after they join the European Union. As far as regional cooperation is concerned, and that's a third element, Iceland's accession to the Union is a unique opportunity to strengthen its presence in the Arctic area. And last but not least, we are talking about the public opinion, because public opinion is essential for the success of the accession process. In this line of thought, I believe we should encourage the Icelandic authorities' initiative to launch a public debate and to consult all the stakeholders with an interest in this project of the accession. Ever more so, since Icelanders would like to receive more information about the Union and its policies. Thank you very much.
Herr Kollege, das Wort hat jetzt für die Fraktion der
Now, on behalf of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, Mr. SASSOLI, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. President in Office, Commissioner, the negotiations with Iceland will mark another stage in European integration. It's a country which has been signing agreements with the European Union, Schengen, back in 1997. It's one of the founding members of the World Trade Organization. Iceland has shown up to now that it's respected many of the accession criteria, even though there are some areas where it could improve. Mr. Preda mentioned its legal system. It's important that Iceland adopt clear machinery to make sure that its legal officers are independent and dealing with the appointment of judges, public prosecutors, etc. And the Icelandic government needs to encourage the Icelandic people to become more keen on involving themselves in this European adventure. There are some things which still need to be defined. Whaling, for example, the Agadir conference on the 25th of June confirmed the moratorium. Iceland needs to respect this decision, including the so-called hunting for scientific purposes, which is basically commercial whaling. There's also a point where there needs to be a greater level of involvement from ourselves in the European Parliament. I'm talking about the IceSafe case, which showed how much Iceland needs a good law on conflicts of interest. The negotiating phase can begin, Mr. President in Office, to show that Iceland isn't, or that Europe isn't, a closed-off area, and that we would welcome Iceland joining in our attempt to create a completely united Europe. Thank you.
Das Wort hat jetzt für die Fraktion der
Now, on behalf of the ALDE group, Mr. Van Baalen for 1.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam President. Iceland is one of the oldest democracies in Europe. The Althing, the Icelandic Parliament, is the oldest parliament on our continent. Iceland is a member of the European Economic Area, of Schengen, of Dublin, and this means that the lion's share of the acquis communautaire have already been adopted by Iceland. So, I think that we should welcome negotiations with Iceland, because I think Iceland can make a major contribution to Europe. Having said that, Madam President, there are a number of obligations that need to be complied with vis-à-vis the United Kingdom and the Netherlands in relation to IceSave. You know that agreements with both countries were rejected via a referendum, and this means that the Icelandic government needs to undertake strenuous efforts to come up with an agreement with the United Kingdom and the Netherlands which is complied with, because the whole foundation of European integration is pacta sunt servanda, that you have to live up to your obligations, your commitments, and that could be the final chapter leading to accession to the European Union, and under those conditions we welcome the accession negotiations. Thank you. Thank you, colleague. I would now like to give the floor on behalf of the Greens ALE group to Mr. Tarand for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, we are discussing a document that will define the European Parliament's position and mandate for the negotiations of Iceland. It is also an important message to the public and the Icelandic public, which we know is not very optimistic on the issue of EU accession. As this constitutes a mandate, we should stress these aspects that might turn out to be the most complicated: fisheries and whaling. And I regret that in the Foreign Affairs Committee the Green amendments were voted down. They would have been a fair and direct communication to the Icelandic people. At the same time, other points that do not deal directly with the negotiations mandate were not voted down, and I mean by it the IceSave. Fortunately, the rapporteur, Mr. Preda, has achieved a satisfactory compromise. It seems to me unfair that some would like to make the entire population of Iceland responsible for the wrong decisions of some economists. Furthermore, some UK local governments deposited the money in Iceland's banks, but the money was collected from the taxpayers for education and public transports and not casino visits. At one meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Iceland was called the bankrupt Iceland. Yes, the financial crisis has struck Iceland, but are there many countries which were not affected by it? Let us recall that in 1971, Denmark also was in a dire financial situation, but a year later it became a good member of the EU. And I do hope, Mr. President, that already during our legislature we shall fit in 6 extra chairs for the members of Parliament from Iceland.
Thank you. On behalf of the ECR group, Mr. Tannock for 1.5 minutes.
The ECR group supports enlargement of the Union, and in principle, of course, we support the accession of Iceland, if that's what the people of Iceland themselves want. There are several reasons why Iceland's membership would be good for the EU. First, the more the EU increases its size, hopefully the looser and more flexible the Union will become. Second, Iceland's dependence on its fishing industry will most likely result in a favourable deal, which itself may prompt long overdue reform of the common fisheries policy and pave the way for Norwegian eventual accession. Third, Iceland has already adopted large chunks of the acquis through membership of the European Economic Area and the Schengen zone. Therefore, absorption of Iceland would not exacerbate the so-called enlargement fatigue that has been blamed for the public's disenchantment with the European Union. No one expects wealthy Icelanders, of course, to leave their underpopulated country en masse to seek work elsewhere in the European Union, as might be the case, for example, if Turkey once joined in the future. Of course, the decision rests with the people of Iceland in a referendum. In the last referendum held in Iceland, voters decided against refunding British savers billions of pounds following the collapse of the IceSave bank. I remain confident that Iceland will recognise and honour its EEA legal obligations in this regard to other most affected member states, such as my own country, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the GUE-NGL group, Mr. Søndergaard for 2 minutes. Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. In the course of the debate about Icelandic membership of the EU, there's one thing that I think is lacking, a self-critical analysis. In my opinion, the debate shouldn't just focus on the areas in which Iceland has to adapt itself to the EU. We shouldn't make ourselves into a propaganda machine, and we shouldn't say that membership of the EU should be nothing but an advantage for Iceland. We should have an objective analysis of the advantages and disadvantages, the pros and cons of membership for Iceland. Now, it would have been good if Iceland had been a member with the current fisheries policies, though, but that would have been a disaster for actually the fisheries sector in that country, because it is the dominant sector in the Icelandic economy. Now, here, if we are calling for liberalisation in the EU of the banking sector, now that actually was not something that prevented the banking crisis that occurred in Iceland, but actually was a contributory factor to it. So here, it would be far more difficult to export yourself out of the crisis, which is what Iceland is in the course of doing, based on its own floating currency. Now, if you look at the most recent opinion polls in Iceland, you will see an increasing opposition to EU membership. If a referendum were held today, 70% would vote against and only 30% would vote in favour of Icelandic membership. If you think that a propaganda campaign can do something to change these figures with the EU's blessing, then you're totally wrong. Iceland's application should not just be a reason for us to place demands on Iceland. It should give us an opportunity to take a self-critical look at our own policies in the EU. Thank you. Thank you. Now, on behalf of the EFD group, Mr. Soini for 1 minute.
Kiitoksia, rouva puheenjohtaja. Puhun suomalaisena
Thank you, Madam President. As a Finn, I am, of course, from a northern European country, but Iceland is a sovereign nation, and my advice to Iceland would be think long and hard about this. Make sure you don't make a mistake. You're a very important European country, but there is intelligent life outside the EU, in Norway, in Switzerland, in Iceland, very effective, useful countries. We've got a lot of experience in Finland of being inside the European Union. We're a small country and our decision-making power has been taken away from us. Iceland has its own way of doing things, and when there is a referendum in northern European countries, people make a decision, as has been done in Iceland, but they don't vote again. But Europe makes countries vote over and over again, so they come up with the result that Europe wants. Don't fall into this trap, Iceland.
For 1 minute.
Now, Mr. Griffin, for a minute.
The defining feature of the EU conspiracy, apart from endemic waste and fraud, is that it rides roughshod over the wishes of real people. The push to bully Iceland into surrendering to EU rule is an example. Gallup polls reveal that 60% of Icelanders want to retain their freedom by staying out of the EU. Only 26% are now fooled by the pro-union propaganda of the corporate media. This is no surprise. Icelanders have the oldest tradition of true democracy in the world. They do not want to exchange it for rule by unelected commissars. Icelanders have some of the last great fish stocks in the world. They want to preserve them from being destroyed, as EU membership has destroyed Britain's fish stocks. Icelanders are proud of their Viking origins, vibrant culture and identity. EU rule would doom Reykjavik to become a scale model of the Muslim ghettos of Londonistan, Paris, Brussels and Copenhagen. So, from the belly of the Euro beast, I urge the people of Iceland, stay free, say no to European Union.
Es folgen jetzt die weiteren.
Now, other speakers. First of all, Mr. Brok for 1 minute.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, Commissioner, President in Office, colleagues. I would welcome Icelandic accession to the EU because Iceland already fulfills many of the conditions in its capacity as a member of the European Economic Area. It is a very well-functioning democracy, one of the best that I know. And I think that the EU could be a safe haven, a safe port for Iceland. And Icelandic accession is in our own interest. You just need to take a look at the situation which would arise if Iceland were to join the EU. But there's a whole series of questions which are not covered by the European Economic Area. For example, whaling is one of those issues. And there are other issues linked to the free movement of capital, agriculture and so forth. These issues have to be resolved. I think we have to encourage the Icelandic government to negotiate in the knowledge that the majority of the population stands behind it. So I would urge them to campaign for EU membership, and I would like the Commissioner to take action so that we're not just negotiating for the sake of it. Thank you. Ms. McCarthy for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. There is no doubt that Iceland's home is in the European Union, and it may come as a surprise to Nick Griffin that Iceland already voluntarily applies 2/3 of EU laws, voluntarily is a member of the internal market and voluntarily is in the Schengen zone. What I want to stress today is that we need to develop responses to the financial crisis. It's been a dominant feature of our European policy-making process. And, Commissioner, as you know, today the Parliament will vote on the financial supervisory package and on capital requirements for institutions and rules for bankers' pay and remuneration. It is therefore important that in the wake of Iceland's banking collapse that we strengthen our partnership around financial reform, and I am pleased therefore that this forms a key part of the negotiations and indeed an early part of the negotiations with Iceland. There is, of course, as many colleagues have said, one major outstanding issue that needs to be resolved. The Icesave negotiations between the UK, Netherlands and Iceland need to find a fair and equitable solution to the compensation paid to savers and indeed to, in my own constituency, a cancer care charity who lost funds then that they had donated to them, but also had to be compensated by our government. So I am pleased that the Commission and Council recognise the importance of this solution. And again, can I stress that financial services and improved supervision must be an essential element of the negotiation in the interests of the European economy, not just of Iceland and other member states. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Das Wort hat jetzt Herr Gallagher.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher for 1 minute.
Thank you. Iceland is uniquely placed to proceed quickly with negotiations, as she has already adopted, as others have said, a significant part of the community acquis due to its membership of the EEA. Over 35 different aspects of EU policy is to be concluded, including the area of competition policy, financial services, agriculture, fisheries, amongst others. As Chairman of the European Parliament delegation for relations with the EEA, I strongly believe that aside from the political negotiations that will now commence, it is of equal importance to further improve the political and civil society dialogue between the European Union and Iceland. By tradition, access negotiations are an open-ended process with progress dependent on the good faith of both parties. This is why, for example, it is important that Icesave issues remains a bilateral affair. My simple recommendation to the Icelandic people, who may be apprehensive at this stage, is to await the final outcome before taking fixed positions. And there is no question of bullying Iceland, as Arlene McCARTHY has said. The Icelandic people, they are an intelligent people, and they will decide after the negotiations are complete where their future is. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Das Wort hat jetzt Frau Sargentini.
Thank you, Mrs. Sargentini, for 1 minute.
Dank u, voorzitter. Als Nederlander vind ik het natuurlijk van...
Thank you. As a Dutch person, I think it's extremely important that we should reach an agreement with Iceland about the debts incurred in relation to Icesave, but that shouldn't be an obstacle to opening negotiations. The constructive attitude adopted by my colleagues who are MEPs from the Netherlands shows that we welcome the prospect of enlargement, including Iceland, because they'll be able to pay back the debt because they're becoming member states. Turning now to whaling. You know that we have put whales on the list of endangered species. European countries do not catch whales, do not engage in whaling. Now, I think that if Iceland wants to join the EU, they have to stop whaling, and I think that this Parliament should make that signal clear. Let's not, at the very outset of negotiations, drop this issue of whaling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Van Dalen now has the floor for 1 minute.
Voorzitter, het verzoek van IJsland.
Thank you very much, President. It's perfectly logical that Iceland wishes to join the European Union. We support it. Contrary to Turkey, it's a part of Europe and it has long-standing economic, social, cultural and ideological agreements with Europe. It's very much in line with the European culture, again in contrast to Turkey. This country also complies with all the Copenhagen criteria, but it's also extremely important that we find a solution to the problem between the Netherlands and the UK with the Icelandic banks. This problem has got to be resolved. A lot of financial issues will have to be negotiated during the accession procedure, but they must only be wound up once there is full agreement with Iceland on the repayment of this money. For me, this is an absolute essential condition. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Farage now has the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you. We're talking about a small Atlantic community with a parliament that's been in existence for over 1,000 years. We're talking about a place with good levels of education. We're talking about a place where people actually think before they jump. And I think that's why roughly 2/3 of people in the opinion polls have made their minds up. They don't want to join the European Union. It isn't going to happen. And all I can say is lucky old Iceland. Because they weren't part of this club, because they didn't surrender to the euro, they've had a competitive devaluation of the krona, which has been good for their economy. It's led to a tourist boom, and I would have thought countries like Greece would be very jealous of them. And they've got a 200-mile exclusive economic zone for their fisheries, which they won during the cod wars with Britain back in the 1970s. Don't sacrifice it, don't give it away, don't trust your own career politicians, because if you do, this lot will take your greatest renewable resource from you. Don't do it.
Das Wort hat jetzt Frau.
I now call Ms. Morvai for 1 minute.
Very much. Being a human rights lawyer, I follow the accession process of Iceland from the perspective of human rights, and I must say with great worries. From the point of view of human rights, mainly, of course, of those who challenge, question or protest against the accession. I have just 1 minute, so let me remind you, dear Icelandic citizens, of two important things. One is you have a fundamental human right under modern human rights law to be informed correctly and precisely and accurately about public affairs, meaning not just the positive sides but also the negative sides of accession. Moreover, those of you who want to mobilize against accession have just the same right to freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly as those who mobilize for the accession, and you have just the same rights to financial resources, public financial resources without discrimination, and access to public media, public television and so on. Do claim your rights before it is going to be too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Ms. OOMEN-RUIJTEN for 1 minute. President, colleagues, I should like to thank Mr. PREDA for the excellent work that he has done. It's been very constructive. During the accession negotiations, you have to be realistic. There's no point in raising false hopes. And if there are difficult points, you have to identify them and you have to be frank about it. I think we have to stick by the criteria we have set and will set in the future. It is vital that all the obligations incumbent upon Iceland from the acquis are complied with. The Commission has said this too. And it has also said that there's not sufficient financial supervision over the banking and financial markets in Iceland. There's got to be proper implementation of the deposit guarantee scheme because there have been enough difficulties in the past with countries such as the Netherlands and the UK. It is also vital that negotiations are carried out, that undertakings are lived up to, and that we make progress here. I think civil society and politicians are not necessarily at one on whether Iceland wants to accede or not, and that's what we have to take into account too. Thank you. We now, colleagues, have 5 minutes of Catch the Eye. Only 5 minutes at the most because we're under pressure of time. I've already got at least 20 people on the list, so nobody else need indicate their wish to take the floor. I first call Ms. Băsescu, who has 1 minute.
În primul rând, doresc să-l felicit pe colegul.
Thank you, President. First of all, I would like to congratulate my colleague, Mr. Preda, for his work on this report. Its adoption over 1 year after Iceland has submitted its accession request sends a message, a positive message of support for its integration efforts. I would like to emphasize that Iceland has been working together with the European Union for years. It has joined the European Economic Area in 1994 and the Schengen Area in 1996. Therefore, I believe this country will very quickly be able to implement European legislation and the European acquis. I believe that Iceland's accession to the EU has a strategic importance for the strengthening of the Union's role in the Arctic area. Moreover, Iceland would gain in stability and the Union would have a new member who may be in crisis right now but has a market economy and a democratic system. Thank you very much.
Das Wort hat jetzt Herr Papa.
I now call Mr. Papadopoulou for 1 minute.
Κυρία Πρόεδρε, η Ισλανδία είναι μια μικρή νησιωτική χώρα.
Thank you. It's a small island state and it has a potentially very powerful economy, and it has moved fairly well through the recent economic crisis. There is of course a problem of the collapse of the bank and the subsequent devaluation of the Icelandic currency, but it has nevertheless the need to reorganize its supervisory system as far as its banks are concerned. The idea that Iceland is interested in joining the European Union would in fact help strengthen its structures, and similar ideas could be put forward for Turkey, because Iceland is a fully democratic country. It's a member of the EEA and it's a country where the rule of law is fully respected. This would, I think, allow Europe to open more to the north, and it would be important to deal with issues such as fishing.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Chris Davis. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I believe Iceland's membership would strengthen the values of the European Union, and I welcome the application. But I'm told that our insistence on the curtailing of whaling will provoke an outcry in Iceland. But Icelanders need to understand that not to insist upon such a curtailment would provoke an outcry in the rest of Europe. I think we have to recognise that Iceland has an excellent record in marine conservation, much better than that of many member states. And I could live with an arrangement that allowed whaling solely to meet indigenous needs, although the evidence is that Icelanders themselves don't seem to like whale very much. But I can't accept whaling for commercial export. I hope that Iceland will become known as the place in Europe where we go to watch whales, not where we go to see them killed.
Vielen Dank. Das Wort.
Thank you very much. I now call Mr. Kelly for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. I welcome Iceland's application. I'm not aware of anybody putting a gun to their head, and I think they want to join the European Union because they hope, in the words of the Belgian Prime Minister earlier on, they see the European Union as a guarantee of prosperity. Well, the message has to go out loud and clear. There are no guarantees of prosperity. It's a two-way street. And as John F. Kennedy, the late President from America, to paraphrase his words, we should say to member countries and applicant countries, ask not what the EU can do for you, but what you can do for the EU. There is no gold mine out here that people can dip their hands into and become prosperous. Also, I welcome the application of Iceland because it will give us an opportunity to reform the common fisheries policy, as other speakers have said. I know in my own country people feel very aggrieved, especially the fishing community, at this current situation. Having Iceland in, renegotiating it, can change that. Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much. I now call Mr. HOWITT for 1 minute.
Thank you, Vice President. It seems to me there are two contradictory paragraphs on fisheries in our resolution. Para 26, which I'll vote against, encourages Iceland to adopt fisheries measures that will allow it to make the transition towards the introduction of the common fisheries policy. Surely not the current CFP. Surely Icelanders won't volunteer to join a common fisheries policy which has failed us, just as it would fail them. By contrast, paragraph 25 recognises Iceland's responsible and sustainable attitude to fisheries and calls for constructive negotiations on fisheries so that the outcome may be a mutually satisfactory solution based on best practices protecting the interest of both fishermen and consumers in the EU as well as in Iceland. On that note, which I do support, I think there is a need for urgent discussions with Iceland on the issue of the mackerel fishery, which I think the Commissioner will be aware of and should be brought forward. But also I think that Iceland has a role to play in indicating...
I apologise, but we have now to give the floor to Mr. PAŠKA, who has 1 minute, and that's the end of Catch the Eye.
Ďakujem za slovo, vážená pani predsedníčka, vážený pán komisár, ctení kolegovia. Myslím si, že všetci vnímame...
Thank you, colleagues. We all believe that Iceland is part of Europe, and for that reason we welcome the efforts undertaken by the Icelandic government. Iceland is a prosperous country and it has a wealth of experience to offer the European Union. In the realm of environmental protection, for example, this experience can be extremely important for us in other sectors too, such as the energy sector. The accession of Iceland to the EU would enrich the EU. There are a number of fundamental issues that remain, however. Do the citizens of Iceland want to give up part of their sovereignty, and will they respect the EU's taking over some of these issues? Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Commissioner Füle to reply on behalf of the Commission.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Let me once again appreciate the role of the European Parliament, including the draft resolution which is on your table on Iceland. Enlargement is indeed a very serious process, and it won't be used for bullying anyone, not here in the EU, not any aspirant country. Not only at the end of this process, but throughout this process, it needs to be clearly established that the membership is value added for both Iceland and the European Union. I heard today during the discussions a number of important points on whaling, on the fishery policies, on public support. I am taking them very seriously, and they will be high on my list of priorities throughout the accession negotiations. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. To wind up the debate, I now call President Vanackere. Thank you very much, Madam President. I should like to extend my thanks to the Rapporteur for the excellent cooperation that has taken place between Parliament, Commission and Council. This cooperation is something we would like to build on as we go through our presidency. As Commissioner Füle has just indicated, Iceland is already facing a number of challenges, but it has already implemented a lot of the acquis communautaire indirectly. We face difficulties certainly with IceSave. There are issues such as whaling, yes, but we can resolve these during negotiation. We need to embark on negotiations with a win-win attitude, because Iceland can benefit, so can the European Union. We can all benefit from greater integration, and that is the background against which we should be negotiating. There is no place for enlargement fatigue, and we should therefore be doing our utmost in order to bring this process to a positive conclusion. Thank you. Thank you very much, President. I'm very sorry for interrupting you. Colleagues ought to know when they come in during a debate that they have to be considerably quieter than that. The motion for resolution has been submitted, B47 from 2010. It's on behalf of the Foreign Affairs Committee. It will be voted in due course. This winds up the debate on this item. The vote will actually take place in 5 minutes. We will now suspend the sitting for 5 minutes to give people time to sit down quietly. Thank you.
Das ist vielleicht